Hi guys, so this is going to be a bit longer of a video today than normal because I want to make sure we really understand this before we move on. So we're going to talk a little bit about tenths and hundredths. And if you remember from our lessons earlier in the year, this is the beginning of our lessons on decimals. So this is fractions, but remember that I said fractions and decimals are very similar. So please pay attention to this presentation so that way you absolutely know everything that you're doing when it comes to decimals. So it's important for you to remember that fractions are pieces of a whole and decimals are too. So we're going to start by talking about hundredths. In this box, there are 100 squares. The 100 squares make one whole. This fraction represented would be 40 hundredths because I have 40 little squares that are highlighted out of the 100 possible squares. In the bottom block, there are 10 rectangles. This would make it tenths. It takes 10 rectangles to make one whole. The fraction represented by this area would be 7/10 because there are 7 shaded in blocks out of 10 total blocks. So how do we do equivalent fractions for this? Remember that equivalent fractions are fractions that look like they're different, but they're actually equal. So in my example, I have these two fractions and they are equivalent. Over here, I have 7/10. And over here, I have 70 hundredths. So even though that they look very different because there's a different number of squares and rectangles in each of them, they have the equal amount of shaded in, 7 and 70. Now this would be the same if you had 2 filled in, you would have 20 filled in. So naming some equivalent fractions, I'm going to go through this pretty quick. 20 hundredths is equivalent to 2/10. 9/10 is equivalent to 90 hundredths. 70 hundredths is equivalent to 7/10. Over here, 30 hundredths is equivalent to 3/10. 50 hundredths is equivalent to 5/10. And 6/10 is equivalent to 60 hundredths. Now let's talk a little bit about adding them. So we know that when we're adding fractions, they have to have the same denominator, but these are not going to. So step 1 is to make an equivalent fraction. I typically recommend making the larger equivalent fraction, so making hundredths, because that's going to be easier for you. And we do this because we need the bases to be the same. We need the denominators to be the same. Step 2 is add. So let me walk you through this. If we have 6/10 plus 18 hundredths, I'm going to turn that 6/10 into an equivalent fraction that has the same denominator. So when I do that, I'm going to turn it into 60 hundredths. 60 hundredths and 6/10 are equivalent fractions. Now I can easily add 60 hundredths plus 18 hundredths. I'm going to get 78 hundredths. So first, you're turning your tenths into the equivalent fraction of hundredths, and then you add, that's it. So there is a way you can do this with modeling instead of doing equivalent fractions. So we're going to be adding the fraction parts with a model to get our whole. Well, it won't be a whole, it will still be a fraction. So first I need to see 5/10. Oh, I'm sorry, step 1, fill in the model for the tenths. So I had 5/10, so I filled in 5 blocks. Step 2 is fill in the model for the hundredths. I have 13 hundredths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now if I counted these up, I would get my answer. I have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63. I have 63 hundredths. Oh, sorry. I have 63 hundredths as my answer to this equation 5/10. plus 13 hundredths. Okay, so if we were going to go through this really fast, I would have 44 tenths plus 1/10, or I'm sorry, 44 hundredths plus 1/10. I would turn this into hundredths first, so it would be 10 hundredths. Add that, I would get 55 hundredths. Oh, I'm sorry, 54 hundredths, excuse me. 2 tenths plus 73 hundredths, I would turn this into 20 hundredths. So 20 hundredths plus 73 hundredths is going to be 93 hundredths. 6 tenths plus 29 hundredths, I would turn 6 tenths into 60 hundredths. 60 hundredths plus 29 hundredths is going to be 89 hundredths. Oh, I'm sorry, subtracting now. So it's basically the same thing. First you make your equivalent fraction and then you subtract. So I'm going to take this 6 tenths minus 18 tenths and I'm going to make it an equivalent fraction. 60 hundredths minus 18 hundredths. Now I can subtract normally and I am going to get 42 hundredths. So you make your equivalent fraction, 6 tenths is equivalent to 60 hundredths, and then you subtract. The other way you can subtract is using a model. Step 1 is fill in the model for the tenths, or whatever you have here. So if you have hundredths here, you need to fill it in for the hundredths, but you fill it in for the first number, because in a subtraction problem, your first number is going to be your larger number, so you want to fill that in first. Step 2 is take away from the hundredths, in this case, or your second fraction. So I have 5 tenths filled in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm going to subtract 13 hundredths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. How much do I have left? I have 10, 20, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37 hundredths. Okay, I'm not going to go through and work these out individually for you guys. If you need more help, please, you can always rewatch this video. Please reach out to me if you need help. I know this was a long one today, guys. All right, have a great day.